Hello my friends, welcome back to another video. Hope you guys are all having a fantastic day. Today's upload is going to be my preliminary winter forecast part 3, 2018-2019. This is going to be my last update forecast before my final one, which is somewhere around late October, this month, October into early November. Somewhere around that time frame I should be making my final forecast. So definitely stay tuned for that, and hopefully you will enjoy. If you like these forecasts, if you like these winter forecasts, then consider dropping a like, consider pressing the subscribe button. If you're an old viewer but not a member yet, then consider becoming a member and subscribing. If you're a new viewer but not a member yet, check out my channel, then you could decide for yourself whether you like this channel. Okay, so now onto this thing. I decided to keep this forecast short and concise, just show you the main three factors and main three variants into this forecast that will be deciding what I'll be forecasting at the end. But there's, just to let you know, I have included much more sources, much more data into my final forecast. However, I have not included it in this forecast because that would make it a 30 to 40 minute video, which absolutely no one would watch. So let's just go through this. We have the Niño Outlook, analogs, and other forecasts. Those are our main three, and they're actually going to take up quite a bit of our time. So the Niño, or Enso neutral, is favored. I'll explain what this is in a minute. Through August through October 2018 with an El Nino. So we're not going to worry about August through October, since that's not, if it's not winter, then, why worry about it, since this is a winter forecast. So an El Nino favored thereafter, so chances for an El Nino are 65 to 70% during the Northern Hemisphere winter of 2018-2019, which we're doing a forecast on. And this graph is here just to show you basically for October, November, December, November, December, January, and February are all, and even March, are all El Nino year or El Nino months. You could see at least 60%, but there's a catch to this, even when I show you how this, so this is what an El Nino typical pattern looks like, but there's a catch to this. There's several catches to it, so don't get too caught up by this. So an El Nino typical pattern, warm and dry across the north, or at least a northwestern part of the United States, while the south is wetter and cooler with a little bit more rain, and you can see that the east coast is somewhere in between with some potential average conditions. But again, there's a fairly large catch to this. So first off, where we start off with this whole catchy thing that I was talking about is, okay, so the models are predicting an El Nino to develop. However, they're predicting a El Nino to develop that's not going to be that strong. It's not going to be above 1 degree above the anomaly, or above average. So you can see statistical average, DYN average, and CPC Climate Prediction Center Council. You could see that they're all predicting under 1 degree Celsius in terms of the El Nino. So that is a very, very weak to moderate El Nino. I mean, that is borderline neutral at this point. So they are fairly confident an El Nino will form, but again, they are fairly also confident that it will be weak. I mean, the strongest one that's showing, which I doubt it this will happen, you can see, I think that's the one of these models, the Met France, so like one of the French models are showing, you could see up 1.5 degrees above average, which isn't really even, that's around moderate. That's not even considered strong. So this is definitely going to be weak to moderate. So a weak to moderate El Nino versus a regular El Nino, there are some differences. You can see a weak to moderate El Nino is different, much different. So it's still mild and dry across the northwestern parts. However, it's wetter in California, which is similar to the El Nino. But the main difference is in the eastern part of the United States. And when these two jet stream branches merge, the subtropical and the polar one, they produce these big storms, or a storm can be riding along one of these, either the polar jet or the southern, or even two pieces could be riding. There could be a northern piece to this storm and a southern piece. These two combine and it could form a massive nor'easter, blizzard, snowstorm, whatever you want to define it as. And you can see that it produces much snow across the eastern part of the United States, and depending on how cold this cold air, how far south it reaches and how cold it is, it depends on how much snow will be falling in southern areas like the Mid-Atlantic, the Carolinas, North Carolina, even as far south as South Carolina. So with this year, I do think that the cold air will be going down fairly south, as it is right now already in October. It's going down fairly down far to the south, and what we are seeing across the eastern across the eastern Pacific Ocean, what we're seeing right now is a weak to moderate El Nino forming. So if this pattern continues, we will definitely seeing some setup for some nice snows across the eastern half of the country, especially the east coast. So that is that. That is a weak to moderate El Nino, comparing to a typical El Nino pattern where the cold air stays up to the north, and here the cold shots bring it further to the south. And I would actually go as far as saying that these cold shots may be just prolonged cold periods rather than just cold shots. So the next factor of this is still the ENSO outlook part, and this is called an potential for an El Nino Modoki. And an El Nino Modoki, the chances are diminishing. I remember at the beginning of the year I was more confident in it. However, it doesn't seem, I wasn't, for sure 100% that this will happen, but I was even more confident in the fact that I was fairly sure an El Nino, just a regular El Nino pattern, was not going to happen. And at this point, it does seem fairly likely that the weak to moderate El Nino will be occurring. I could take off this pointer and use my mouse because I think you could see that better. But the weak to moderate El Nino is more likely to form than the Modoki, but the Modoki still has a chance to form. And even if it does, my main point here is that the effects of a Modoki and a weak to moderate El Nino are fairly similar, which I'll show you in just a minute. So, this is a regular El Nino, eastern-based El Nino. You can see the waters in the Pacific Ocean are eastern-based, the warm waters, and that's what defines an El Nino. Sorry if I didn't explain that at the beginning, but an El Nino is characterized by warmer waters in the Pacific Ocean, or at least 0.5 degrees in Celsius warmer, and then El La Nina is 0.5 degrees cooler in Celsius, but we're not dealing with that right now, and we're not going to deal with that this year. And you can see an El Nino Modoki, it is a little bit different from just a El Nino, eastern-based El Nino, in the fact that it is more central-based, the warm waters, and there's some cooler waters right off the coast. So if we were to look at the sea surface temperatures right now, I didn't include them. They are not either the eastern-based or the Modoki, which gives us that uncertainty that this may occur. But at this point, we are starting to see some flare-ups of this eastern-based El Nino happening. I don't have the current image of the sea surface temperatures included. I should have done that, but I'm sorry. I have done that in my previous ones and basically all my other outlooks, so forgive me once. And you can see that during an El Nino Modoki, again, the warm waters are more centrally based, and right now, if we were to look at the sea surface temperatures, they are somewhere in between. It's just warm all across the ocean, it's not eastern based, not central based. I would call it all based, an El Nino right now. And an El Nino Modoki, if it were to form, if this were to take shape, we would be seeing wetter than normal across the south, northeast, and midwest, which again, with that weak to moderate El Nino, which I was showing you earlier, we could be seeing very similar things. With an El Nino Modoki, we see big storms across the northeast, with the same thing with the weak to moderate El Nino, and we see drier and warmer conditions with a weak to moderate El Nino across the west, same thing with the El Nino Modoki we could be seeing. The only difference between a weak to moderate and a Modoki in terms of the western part of the United States is that California will be wet or wetter than average during a weak to moderate El Nino rather than a Modoki. And this is just comparing to an El Nino anomalies. You could see wetter across the west and a little bit drier across the east. So those are some differences versus just a old typical eastern-based El Nino. So right now, let's move on to the analog part of this forecast. You can see that we are looking currently right now on the map of the United States. This is an analog of surface air in terms of Celsius, and you can see that most of the United States here, eastern part of the United States, east of the Rockies, is around average in terms of temperatures, spanning from November to March in a bunch of weak to moderate El Nino years. So this is a typical pattern, typical temperature departures from normal for a weak to moderate El Nino. You can see it's slightly warmer across the west, but anywhere else, slightly cooler than average. Now, to compare it to an El Nino, you can see a bunch of El Nino years. You could see that spanning again from November to March, it is warmer across the north and average across the south and to slightly below average. So there are some differences. And now if we were to look at, and it's also cool to look at that the cold air is just locked up in Canada, northern Canada, and doesn't really push its way down into here due to that jet stream that's up there, on that polar jet stream that's refusing to move. And this is a Modoki El Nino that I compiled. This is just 1 year. I know I should have probably done more, but I have done more actually before once, and the pattern is very similar, just not as cold, but still generally across this area I would say it is below average. So and again, that west could be a little bit slightly above average, so definitely some interesting things to watch during this winter. Whether it's basically going to be mainly between the Modoki and a weak to moderate El Nino, and those two things may eventually just combine actually into their own little pattern, since every winter depends on so many factors, so many different things, that two things just won't decide it. So now looking at the other forecast, which I titled this part of the video, or one of my factors was other forecast. This is looking at the Farmer's Almanac. I don't really like looking at this, but I still include it because I know a lot of people want me to include it into this forecast. You can see that it seems like if they have biting cold and teeth chattering cold every year across the northern part of the United States, which doesn't happen. Remember, they had it for the 2016-2017 winter, I think. It did not even, was close. It was one of the record-breaking warm winters here across the north. So, am I saying that it won't be teeth chattering cold this year? No, I'm just saying that we got to take this with a little bit less, confidence and a little less certainty, this forecast, because they seem to have very repetitive forecasts year and year after. But generally cold in the east and warm in the west and a little bit wetter in the west. That's what they're saying. Now let's move to the AccuWeather, which I think is much better. Highlights, you could see winter 2018-2019. They have cold shots, which again would be matching with that weak to moderate El Nino. They have some wet and chilly wintry mix, even extending down into parts of the south, which would make sense with that cold air and above average precip. And cold and mild periods, I don't know if I would agree on that. I would probably include the cold shots into that area right there. It just doesn't make sense to have cold and mild periods in the northeast only, and here just have cold shots. I don't think it's going to work that way this year. Show you in my forecast in just a minute. Snow they have, and snow in the west, near normal across the desert southwest. A little bit further to the southwest, they have mild and dry, and mid-season rain and snow. So again, very similar, but at the same time, there are a few differences. So now I'm looking at my forecast. You could see that there's quite a bit of things I want to talk about. So you can see I have blizzards actually across the northeast in these areas. I think New York City, Boston, states like Connecticut, Rhode Island, cities like New York City and Boston. I think all of those locations will be fairly prone to big storms across the winter in those areas. So blizzards definitely a good bet for this year for the northeast. And a little bit further to the west, inland parts of the northeast, I think snow and cold. A lot, I didn't mention this, but lots of lake effect off the lakes this year. I think this year will be a very good year in terms of lake effect. So that should be a definite certainty, that definite factor into this, that lake effect will be affecting many parts of these woods. And very cold, I think the coldest part, or compared to average, so let's say their average here is around 40 during the winter. I think they could have 20s, even 30s during the winter as their average here in the southeast. Florida, wherever you are, depending on if you live in Key West, well then maybe your average is going to be around 60, 70, then I think this year you could get down into 40s and 50s. So very cold for the southeast, I think, this year. Again, cold and lake effect across these areas. The Midwest, I think there will be fairly good shots of cold air, kind of like they are going right now in October. Continue that pattern into winter. There will obviously be some breaks in between, but generally that pattern will be, I think, fairly pronounced in this winter. Cold and some snow across the plains and the parts of Midwest and southeastern United States. You can see I have this blue setting all the way down into parts of southernmost tip of Texas, because I do think those parts of the woods can see, and probably will see some snow this year. And then average, I would say, for these parts of the country, nothing in particular. However, that still may change. Again, this is not my final forecast, and even my final forecast may not be 100% right, and it probably won't be. And then I have warmer across the northwest and wetter and cooler with that weak to moderate El Nino, thinking that pattern would set up for the southwest and California. So hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully you learned something new. Again, consider subscribing to my channel. Consider liking the video. I'll catch you all guys in the next episode.